This is TWiT.
I tend to stay away from this stuff because, quite frankly, I hate politics, even though I know it's part of our life. And it is
You're
what it is.
not alone, Mr. Pruitt.
But I did want to attempt to watch this hearing today just for the sake of the show and try to have a little bit of information. And it just made my blood boil listening to some of the crap coming out of the mouths of our leaders of the nation. You got one guy, the guy that you talked about off air. Was it Dr. John something other?
Jim Jordan.
Jordan, that's it.
The guy without the jacket.
Yeah, he's going on and just being rude and asking. I give him credit for asking a yes/no question, and I hate when I ask a yes/no question and people won't give me a yes or no. I give him credit on that for being frustrated on that, but it was still a lot of other chatter going on with people saying, "Hey, well, why is my campaign email showing up as spam in my father's Gmail account?" And I'm like, really, your campaign? It just. Honestly, I guess they just don't quite understand how all of this stuff works.
I expected better because this is a subcommittee that focuses on antitrust. So they're theoretically more up to speed, have staff that's more focused on this exact issue. They've heard a lot of testimony. I thought, it's going to be better than the senators who quizzed Mark Zuckerberg, and it wasn't much.
No, it wasn't. And these... Sorry, let me calm down. Again,
go.
We're just looking at go back to the spam email thing. I mean, this man was just so passionate and pissed off about the idea that his campaign messages are not going directly to the inboxes of all of the citizens that requested it. And I'm like, man, there's bigger problems on this planet. There's bigger problems in this country. But you're worried about spam email, and improper tags of your campaign messages going out there. It just really, really frustrated me. And then there was a Democratic representative from Florida. She asked questions and wouldn't allow Mr. Pachai to freaking answer the question. Every time he went to answer, she'd cut him off.
Reclaiming my time.
I think why is this even happening?
What a lot of this is, and this is the frustration I think most people have when they watch this kind of congressional testimony, is that is, especially lately, mostly a opportunity to, take the stage for these members of Congress to get on TV, to get attention, and to showboat. And that's really what I think we saw as a lot of showboating, right? I don't even know if they cared much about these issues.
Let's look at that. They're wanting to showboat for who? The people that could potentially vote for them?
Yeah.
Okay, so what does that say about the people voting for him if this is what's impressing them?
Remember, most people are not going to watch these hearings. They're going to see sound bites.
They see the sound bites and they get excited. There is very much a nihilistic strain in the world. I mean, I look at my parents and I look at people who are fed up with politics, and to them, these people are like, yeah, stick it to the big CEOs. Right. Screw all these people. And I mean, for them, this is exciting. This is candy. And I guess they don't realize that, unfortunately, we still have to govern a country, and yelling and this doesn't really help. And I feel like sometimes it's a very big, they're playing to the immaturity as opposed to rising above it and realizing that government, and if we could talk about this realistically, you need government to do some things. We can debate what those things are and how far we're going to go on them, and that there will be winners and losers and unintentional winners and losers each time. And Jeff, you and I come up against this a lot, where I'm like, yeah, this is going to hurt some people. And you're like, I don't want it to hurt these people. That will be bad. And I'm like, let's see what happens. Let's see how people adapt. But we don't ever have those discussions in the U.S. because they're too hard of a conversation. And they're I don't even think they're too nuanced. It's just, we can't have them in the formats that we currently have.
No. Stacey, I think a great example of that is 230, right? I don't think 230 should be touched. I think it's good law, but even if you do think it should be touched, those who think it ought to be reconsidered a little bit, you open up that Pandora's box, and what the heck happens then? And you can't have a sane and informed discussion.
They actually, I can't remember if it was Sensenbrenner, but they actually did bring up 230 and the protection it offered, and and talked about it in a negative way, implying that it gave these companies the right to censor speech they didn't agree with, as opposed to. And yeah, I mean, but I have to say, government is intensely boring. Unless you're a particular kind of person. If you're a wonk and you really enjoy this stuff, it's not. It's fascinating. But for most people, watching government is like watching paint dry. It's slow, right. It's tedious, it's detail-oriented, and it's boring. What's sad is that as more and more of these hearings are televised, and everybody knew this was going to be a lot of attention, that everybody's going to be talking about it. It unfortunately brings out the worst in these members of Congress who are taking this as an opportunity to, exactly as you say, Stacey, preach to the base. It's all about, feeding red meat to the base, whichever base they have, and very much less about governing, because they know that the actual governing part of the testimony would be intensely dull. They didn't really seem that interested in fact-finding.
Right. Now, don't get me wrong. For them to attack the CEOs of these large companies, I get it, because ultimately the leader of the company is responsible, even though a lot of those questions they're not going to have the answer to right at that moment, because there's so many different levels of management in that hierarchy. But they were asking those questions as if they would actually know right at that time. That's the kind of stuff that frustrates me. If you're going to ask the CEO about something, do a little bit of your research. If you're a government and you're so detailed oriented, be detailed oriented in your research too.
What happens is the conversations that you see and the back and forth that happens prior to this between the congressional aides, who are the people who are actually crafting the policy. I mean, they educate the Congress people, and then the lobbying firms and lawyers on behalf of the tech firms. So what's happening is this mass of people that we'll never see or hear from, they're hammering out their statements, their questions, it's not entirely scripted, but they know exactly where they're going to go. Okay. And they do that because most people will find it boring, and these guys have to get their sound bites out of it. And there is some accountability for this. Like, I do think this is a good warning / wake up call that, when your lawyers come in and they're like, yeah, this is a big deal. You got to go address this. You're the CEO. They need you. No one else is going to do this. It's got to be you. That's an poop moment for these guys, in the sense that
it's like
an moment.
It's a little bit like a court trial. You have a witness who is clearly going to testify in his own interest. He's hostile. They're not. I don't think they were under oath. Are they under oath? I don't think so.
Oh yeah, they were.
I thought they were.
They're sworn in beforehand.
Oh yeah, they were.
Yes.
I don't think they had to stand up, because then they would have been out of the range of the
belly
camera.
button. Okay, so
I heard him say, after I was listening in the car, and I heard him say, you can remain seated.
Okay, so they do get sworn in. So it is a little bit like a trial in that sense. There's the risk of getting caught in perjury, so you're going to try to avoid that. Lying to Congress is actually a serious offense.
It's a federal offense.
Unless you're a friend of Donald Trump.
Unless you're a friend of the president.
Is it perjury?
Maybe it's not called perjury, but it's lying to Congress.
Oh, it's lying to Congress. You're right. Maybe it is. Yeah.
So, but I think the opportunity is there for the members of Congress to ask. So there's two kinds of questions. They can ask questions that are just theater, like asking the question for the rhetorical purpose of asking the question. They know they're not going to get a good answer, but the question...
It isn't a federal crime to lie to Congress while under oath.
It's not?
That is considered... It is... Okay. It isn't... Oh, it is a federal crime.
Yeah.
Well, this was a terrible articulation of this story. I was like, what?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes. And it is illegal to make false statements to Congress, even if you are not under oath.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yes. You really have to be honest with Congress. So there's two kinds of questions. Pointed questions that are purely rhetorical to make the point, and then questions where you're actually trying to get the answer. I would hope a committee like this would be trying to, just like the Supreme Court, when they're asking questions during oral arguments, the questions would be more to gather information so they can make a decision than to make a political point, a rhetorical point, or to showboat to. And but unfortunately, I think especially when it's a televised hearing like this, it's kind of hard to get people to do that. What would this have looked like in a perfect world, Stacey? What should have gone on here?
Well, this might be as close to perfect as we can get. And I say this, I wish we could get like the money out of politics and some of this crazy grandstanding. Like maybe if you had less Twitterati and more just straight up C-SPAN, we could have some better conversations. But this is kind of how it should look, which is interested parties get together and talk about how this, I mean, people with actual expertise helped the politicians figure out the rules.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And, and
staff
were those people
the
there
questions.
Because they, were some of them lobbyists? Yes. And that's why I think money is the ultimate corrupting influence here. Mm-hmm. But they had educated people doing this. They have, the companies on the other side. And if you had and I don't want more, like, you could envision a system where I call my congressman and I can like vote them in or out, immediate feedback on stuff. But I don't know, like I as a short-term person or my dad, for example, I don't know if we really want that kind of instant response to things because I think we need to look at the long term.
That's right. You don't need to
hire smart people to do a complicated job.
Right.
But that isn't the way it is these days.
Well, and then as somebody in the chat room is pointing out, there's, they're closed hearings where you perhaps get more serious about it. Although I bet there's a bit of showboating in there as well.
There is.
There is. I mean, I have friends who
depresses me. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say I have friends who work on the Hill, and this is like it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so Jeff, is there? I mean, I think we'd all agree there is meat for there is a reason to have this conversation. That these are real questions, that these companies do wield huge amount of power, whether they're monopolies, whether they're trusts under the legal definition.
Well, okay, so let's talk about how to have that conversation, right? I mean, because what scares me to death here is that you have a pincer movement of the left for its reasons and the right for its reasons are going after the proprietors of the internet, and I'm scared for the internet. These are the temporary proprietors. These are the people who are in charge of. Now they ain't gonna be there for forever.
I don't think that's the internet, Jeff. I would say that they're the people building walls on the internet. I mean, the internet has changed and it's a moving entity.
Sorry, I couldn't agree more, Stacey. That's what I'm saying. Is that it's not, these are the temporary proprietors of much of the internet we see. I very much believe temporary.
Nevertheless, they could have impact on what the internet is going forward.
Yes, but so how would you have this discussion? You said, they have a lot of power. Well, let's have evidence of that. Let's have research that informs the discussion. If we're going to talk about antitrust, let's do it in the line of the legality of it and define the legality of it and say what
I think in some of the questions,
rather than a bunch of emotional things.
No, I think in some of the questions that actually happened. I can't remember who it was. There was a member of Congress who was talking to Jeff Bezos and said, our research shows, evidence shows that a company that pays you for advertising is going to be higher ranked, is going to be more likely. In fact, he mentioned testimony from the owner of PopSockets who said Amazon competed directly with us by making a clone ripoff product of PopSockets until we paid $2 million in advertising, and then they stopped.
So stay on the first point for a minute.
That's the point.
How do you think Coke gets the end cap?
No. That was my immediate reaction is that Amazon's doing nothing different in some respects than a grocery store does. That's how grocery store you play for placement. But there are
multiple grocery stores as opposed to the dominant place people. Network effects on the internet are much more. They're if you imagine, that you imagine those things at science museums that you throw the quarters in and it spins around and around and around, but it always goes down the tube. Do you know what I'm talking about? On the internet, if you're a big enough site, I know this is the drugs talking.
How many dollars?
If you're a big enough site, you become that funnel, and nothing can escape. And to get anywhere, and the consumer's at the bottom, you have to go through that funnel. In the real world, there is friction that we're accustomed to, so we go all over the place, and maybe buying an end cap at a Kroger versus a I don't know who, they're all owned by like Safeway now, so I don't know. But I would say actually our issue is our current definition of antitrust. And I think that's where we need to start, is our current framework in the US for antitrust law is demonstrating actual competitive harm, which I think is the wrong thing to look at in this particular era, because I think it's hard, and it's pricing harm is what we're looking at. I think what we need to start looking at is the harm of, aggregated data and the decisions that you make because of that, and then the features and service. And that's much more difficult. It's a much fuzzier problem. But that's actually, that's in part how Europe structures their antitrust laws. And they're looking at these companies too. So I think actually what we need to do is to build more sophisticated legal framework for antitrust. And that's what these hearings should be about.
Right now, Joe Neguse is asking Jeff Bezos if it uses data from AWS gleaned from hosting other companies' data for competitive purposes. This is something Amazon has been accused of.
Good question.
I'm reading Kashmir Hill's tweets. I think that they're maybe now later in the game they're getting into some of the more serious questions. Val Demings is grilling Sundar Pichai because Google promised not to combine Google and DoubleClick data when it bought the ad company in 2007, but then did it 10 years later after Sundar Pichai became CEO. So these are pointed questions, but I think, and perhaps they don't expect answers from the CEOs except deflection, but these are important questions.